Hey guys, tonight we re-heading into the silk-draped streets of Byzantine Constantinople, back when the empire still sparkled with gold leaf and the shadows whispered of revolution. You're standing in a crowded alley where market vendors call out in Greek, the scent of roasted garlic and crushed myrrh thick in the air. The sun blazes off domed rooftops, and somewhere nearby, a group of street performers draws a circle in the dust. Laughter, cheers, a cymbal clashing. You make your way forward through the crowd, and there she is. Not yet an empress, not yet feared. Just a girl with painted eyes, bold gestures, and a mouth too quick for comfort. Theodora. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you re-listening from and what time it is in your part of the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Theodora is performing a mime today, her body language so exaggerated it's almost painful to watch. The audience loves her. She isn't just mimicking, she's mocking. A sly little tilt of her chin, a sarcastic glance skyward, a pratfall that somehow lands closer to truth than comedy. You can't take your eyes off her. She owns the dirt stage like it's a throne. And in some odd way, it is. She was born somewhere around 500 CE. Give or take a year history, didn't write down her birthday with much care. Her father worked for the circus as a bear trainer. Yes, really, bears. And when he died young, her mother, desperate to keep the job and the family, dressed her 3 daughters in stage costumes and marched them back to the hippodrome, hoping to stir pity from the crowds and maybe keep their bellies full another week. It worked, sort of. Theodora's early life was a blur of backstage hustle, makeup, juggling acts, stage whispers, and survival. She wasn't royalty. She wasn't rich. She was just clever. And clever gets you far in a city where gold can be stolen and favor can be bought. She began acting and performing on the public stage, low-ranking theater. Part mime, part satire, part scandal. And by the way, being an actress in the Byzantine world wasn't like being an A-lister today. It was more like being a walking punchline in polite society. Actresses were seen as morally loose at best, barely human at worst. But Theodora didn't care. She used it. She exaggerated. She leaned into the caricature of a woman who knew too much and cared too little. There's a fringe anecdote from The Secret History by Procopius, which is like the gossip blog of its day, that paints Theodora as crude, unrefined, and shameless. It describes her doing dances too risque for even tavern stages. Whether true or malicious fiction, one thing's clear. Her reputation burned through the city like incense. And somehow, that fire caught the attention of a very powerful man. Enter Justinian, future emperor, legal nerd, ambitious son of a pig farmer. He spotted her, or maybe just heard about her, and something clicked. Not just lust, admiration. She had wit. She had presence. She had fire. Historians still argue whether it was love at first sight or a slow, strange friendship that blossomed into something stronger. But Justinian was enchanted, and not long after, determined to marry her. There was just one problem. It was illegal. Roman law strictly forbade senators from marrying actresses, even former ones. Theodora was, by law and reputation, unfit to be his wife. So what did Justinian do? He changed the law. Yep, he persuaded his uncle, Emperor Justin I, to abolish the ban on marrying actresses. And just like that, Theodora walked out of the theater and into the palace. By 527 CE, Justinian became emperor, and Theodora, bold, brazen, once heckled by drunk theatergoers, was crowned Empress of Byzantium. Imagine the looks, imagine the whispers. Theodora walking past court ladies raised on propriety, schooling them all in diplomacy and dagger-sharp sarcasm. She didn't apologize for her past. She wore it like armor. But this wasn't a ceremonial crown. Theodora wasn't content to sit beside Justinian and smile on cue. No, she ruled. With intelligence. With steel. With surprising empathy. Remember the Nika riots? That time, Constantinople nearly burned to the ground because of chariot racing factions gone rogue. Justinian panicked. He was ready to flee the city entirely. But Theodora, cool, calm, majestic in silk and venom, gave a speech. She said, and I'm paraphrasing, "Purple makes a fine burial shroud." Translation: better to die an empress than run like a coward. That one sentence changed everything. Justinian stayed. They crushed the rebellion. And Theodora's place in history was sealed. You pause outside the palace now, gazing up at its massive golden dome. Inside, Theodora is issuing orders changing laws for women, outlawing forced prostitution, granting property rights to widows, all the while balancing political rivals like daggers on a plate. She is no longer that girl in the alley with painted eyes and a wooden stage. She is veiled in imperial purple. She holds the scepter, and she knows exactly what it cost to get here. You wake gently to the sounds of gulls wheeling above a cliffside abbey, the sea wind tugging at the woolen hood wrapped loosely around your ears. The stone beneath your feet is worn smooth not by war or parades, but by the quiet passing of sandaled feet over many, many years. Ahead of you stands a woman in simple robes, her silver hair tucked into a veil, her hands folded in calm authority. This is no queen, no empress, no sword-swinging warlord. This is Hilda of Whitby, and her power hums low and steady, like the tide itself. She isn't the type to raise her voice. She doesn't burn suitors or throw goblets. She simply walks into a room, and the room changes. We've come now to Anglo-Saxon Britain, somewhere around the 7th century. Christianity is sweeping across the island, clashing and blending with old pagan traditions like waves hitting cliff walls. Kings are converting, monasteries are rising, and in this strange new world, Hilda is about to shape not just her people, but the entire course of English religious history. You drift back to her early days. Born around 614, a grandniece of King Edwin of Northumbria, she had royal blood in her veins, but unlike most nobles, Hilda didn't fight for a crown. She reached for truth. Raised in the court of Edwin, she converted to Christianity alongside him after a series of missionary efforts led by none other than Saint Paulinus, a Roman bishop who traveled up the rivers of England, preaching with fire and Latin. Hilda took baptism not as ritual, but as a doorway. While others were still arguing over which saints were which, she was already thinking 5 moves ahead. Here is a quirky little detail you probably didn't expect. Historians still argue whether Hilda once planned to sail to France and join a convent there. But she stayed behind, redirected by Bishop Aidan of Lindisfarne, who saw something powerful in her calm resolve. Instead of becoming a silent nun abroad, she founded a double monastery at Whitby, meaning it housed both monks and nuns under a single rule. Radical stuff for the 7th century. Imagine 2 gendered wings of a sacred house, with shared governance, shared land, shared prayer. Hilda didn't just run it, she designed it like a cathedral for learning. You walk the abbey halls, now stone arches, the scent of beeswax candles, echoing chants sung low. The air is cold but peaceful. Hilda's presence is everywhere. Young monks consult her on scripture. Noblemen ask her advice on politics. Local peasants kneel outside her door for counsel on when to plant their barley. She's not just respected, she's revered. And in a way, Hilda's superpower is her ability to elevate others. There's this one story about a stable boy named Cadman who worked in the monastery's livestock pens and was famously terrible at singing, until one night he had a dream. An angel told him to sing of creation. He woke up, opened his mouth, and out came the first known recorded poem in Old English. Who encouraged him? Who recognized the divine in his voice? Hilda. She didn't laugh at his dream. She didn't dismiss him as a mere farmhand. She told him to sing more, to write, to become a monk, and he did. Historians still debate whether Cædmon's hymn was passed down verbatim or cleaned up by later scribes, but that's not the point. The point is that Hilda saw beauty in the unseen. She made space for unlikely greatness. That's power too. But don't mistake her for soft. Hilda played politics as skillfully as any king. At the Synod of Whitby in 664, she hosted the major church council that decided the future of Christianity in Britain. Would they follow the Roman church calendar or the Celtic one? Would Easter fall with Rome or with the traditions of Iona? Imagine the tension in that room. Robed bishops arguing over dates, traditions, prestige. And there's Hilda calm, unflinching, a woman hosting a council that would change the religious map of a nation. She didn't win that debate. She supported the Celtic side, and Rome prevailed. But she accepted the decision with grace, guiding her community forward rather than clinging to division. That's leadership. That's resilience. You sit by the window in her abbey now, watching the gray sea roll in and out. The candles flicker. The pages of her scripture lie open, inked in soft Latin. You hear the quiet echo of feet in the hallway young monks, copying texts, planting seeds, singing softly under breath. This abbey will one day be destroyed by Viking raiders. But tonight, it stands strong. Hilda dies quietly in her bed, surrounded by prayers. Her bones rest on holy ground. And her legacy? It lives on in every woman who leads from quiet wisdom, every scholar who writes beneath the weight of skepticism, and every soul who builds sanctuaries in turbulent times. Not every warrior carries a sword. Some carry scrolls, and some, like Hilda of Whitby, carry the future. The scrolls close now. The candles in Hilda's abbey flicker low, and the silence becomes sacred. But centuries later, across war-torn France, the stillness is broken, not by hymns, but by marching feet and a sharp cry of prophecy. Another girl rises, not cloistered behind stone walls, but standing barefoot in mud, armor gleaming like dawn. Her name is Joan, and the voices she hears will lead her straight into battle. You're walking across a field that smells of churned earth and old iron. The dawn is gray and heavy, and the birds haven't yet dared to sing. Ahead of you walks a girl. Her boots are worn, but her step is sure. Her cropped hair bristles beneath a battered helmet. She's maybe 17. Maybe, but she walks like she's been following orders from angels for years. Joan of Arc doesn't shout commands. She doesn't need to. Her certainty is louder than any horn. She was born in Domremy, a quiet village tucked along the banks of the Meuse River in northeastern France. Her parents were peasants. Her world small. Cows, churches, weather. At the time, France had been drowning in the 100 Years' War with England, an endless tug-of-war over thrones and borders. Most people alive then had never known peace. They barely knew hope. Joan? She dreamed differently. At 13, she claimed she began hearing voices, gentle at first, then clearer, firmer. They belonged, she said, to saints. Saint Michael, Saint Catherine, Saint Margaret. They didn't just give her comfort. They gave her a job. They told her to save France. Now let's pause a moment. Historians still argue whether Joan's voices were mystical visions, deeply rooted religious imagination, or the psychological coping of a young girl under chronic stress. Maybe all of the above. Maybe something else. But one thing is beyond doubt, she believed them. And so she began her quest. Joan left her family and walked miles to meet Robert de Baudricourt, a local noble, to demand safe passage to the royal court. He laughed. Then, she correctly predicted a French military defeat days before it happened. He stopped laughing. Eventually, she reached the court of the Dauphin Charles, not yet king, just a nervous claimant with thinning support and dwindling morale. He disguised himself in a crowd to test her, but Joan pointed him out immediately. No hesitation. She told him, "You will be crowned, and I will lead you there. You're with her now in the war camps outside Orleans." 1429. The French army has been battered, retreating. The city is nearly lost. And suddenly, there she is, this untrained, unarmored teenager, riding in with a white banner and a spine like steel. Soldiers stop and stare. Not because she's loud, but because she shouldn't be there. And yet, somehow, it feels like she belongs. Here's a quirky little note. She refused to carry a sword into battle. She carried a banner instead a white one, said to be stitched with images of Christ and angels. She said she'd rather lift morale than spill blood. The French surged under her. Orleans was liberated. Victory, the first in years. After that, cities began falling like dominoes, but in reverse. Not to the English, but back into French hands. And through it all, Joan stayed humble. She prayed. She wrote letters, dozens some to nobles, others to kings, even to the English commanders themselves, warning them to go home or face divine justice. There's one letter where she writes, "I am sent here by God, the King of Heaven, to drive you out of France. If you will not obey, then I will make you obey." It's not exactly subtle, but it is iconic. You follow her to Reims, where Charles is finally crowned king. She stands nearby, weeping not for herself, but for her country. The girl from Domremy had done what no one else could. But success, as always, comes with shadows. After the coronation, Joan's influence begins to shrink. The royal court starts to sideline her. Political factions whisper. She begs to press on, to drive out the English completely, but her support dries up. In 1430, while defending Compiègne, she's captured by Burgundian forces, French allies of the English. They sell her to the English for 10,000 livres. She's shackled, moved from prison to prison, eventually taken to Rouen, where her trial begins. It's not a trial, it's a trap. A stacked panel of church officials, all English sympathizers, accuse her of heresy, sorcery, and the crime of cross-dressing, because she wore men's armor to protect herself in battle and prison. They demand she recant her visions. She refuses. Over and over, she answers their questions with the same calm, unshakable conviction. At one point, they try to trip her up with theology, asking if she believes she's in God's grace. She replies, "If I am not, may God put me there, and if I am, may he keep me there." Even they have to pause at that one. Eventually, they convict her, not because she failed to defend herself, but because she would not bend. You're there the morning she's led into the square, hands bound. The wood is stacked. The crowd is quiet, too quiet. One priest offers her a crucifix. She clutches it. And as the flames rise, she cries out one name over and over: Jesus. She dies at 19, and still the English lose the war. Charles remains king. Joan becomes more than a memory. She becomes a symbol. A few decades later, her trial is annaled. In 1920, she's canonized as a saint. But tonight, you remember her not as a statue, or a relic, or a name in a hymnal. You remember the girl walking barefoot through mud, banners flying, voices in her head, and fire in her heart. She never wore the crown, but she carried it. You blink, and the smoke of Rouen melts away. The square empties. The fire turns to candlelight, flickering behind tall stained glass. The drums of war are distant, now replaced by harp strings, whispered oaths, and a different kind of power. You're in Aquitaine now, southern France. The sun here is warmer, the vines grow thicker, and the shadows? Well, they hide more than just secrets. They hide politics, poetry, and one of the most influential women to ever wear a crown. Her name is Eleanor, and where Joan carried a banner, Eleanor plays chess with kings. She's born around 1122 in the city of Poitiers, into the fabulously wealthy and cultured Duchy of Aquitaine. Her father is a patron of the arts, and lucky for Eleanor, a man who insists his daughter receive an elite education. While most noble girls learn how to run a household, Eleanor learns how to run a court. She reads Latin, studies classical philosophy, and hears troubadours sing tales of love and valor in her father's echoing halls. Her world is full of books, politics, wine, and whispers. She grows up knowing exactly how power works, because it dines at her table every night. When her father dies suddenly, she becomes Duchess of Aquitaine at the age of 15. 15. And not just any duchess, the richest heiress in Europe, controlling more land than even the King of France. That gets noticed. Within weeks, Eleanor is married off to Louis VII, King of France, who probably expected a shy, obedient bride. What he gets is a dazzling, brilliant, and sometimes infuriating young queen who speaks her mind and corrects his Latin in public. At first, they try to make it work. They pray, they dine, they travel. But Louis is deeply pious, prone to fasting and long silences. Eleanor is lively, opinionated, and occasionally bored. Very bored. Then comes the Second Crusade. You're with them as they ride eastward in a massive procession. Thousands of troops, priests, nobles, and yes, Eleanor in armor, astride a white horse. That's not a bedtime myth, she actually went. One story even claims she brought her own retinue of women dressed as Amazons. Historians still argue whether this was true or exaggerated, likely a little of both. She wanted to help. She wanted glory. But the crusade was a disaster. Bad planning. Harsh conditions. Rumors swirled that Eleanor and her uncle Raymond of Antioch had grown too close. Louis wasn't amused. Their relationship collapsed in the desert heat. They returned to France humiliated. And Eleanor, never one to linger in failure, made a bold move. She asked for an annulment. In 1152, the Pope granted it, claiming consanguinity, or being too closely related, which, let's be honest, was a convenient excuse for irreconcilable differences. Most women would have faded from history after a failed royal marriage. Not Eleanor. Barely 2 months later, she marries Henry Plantagenet, Duke of Normandy. He's 19, she's 30, and within 2 years, he becomes King Henry II of England. Boom! Eleanor is queen again. You follow her across the channel now, waves lapping against the ship that carries her into her second reign. And this time, she's not playing nice. She rules alongside Henry, not beneath him. Together, they control vast swaths of Europe. England, Normandy, Aquitaine, Anjou. It's a true power couple. Except their marriages, well, explosive. He's brilliant, ruthless, and often unfaithful. She's just as brilliant and not in the mood to be sidelined. Here's a quirky tidbit. Henry once banned all troubadours from court because he was convinced they stirred Eleanor into rebellion. Music as a political weapon. You have to love medieval drama. They have 8 children. Among them, Richard the Lionheart and John. Yes, the one from Robin Hood. Eleanor spends years managing estates, mediating disputes, and eventually raising open rebellion against her husband with the help of her sons. Yep, she rebelled. In 1173, while Henry's reign grows tyrannical and erratic, Eleanor throws her weight behind her sons in a civil war. The rebellion fails. Henry captures her and places her under house arrest. For 16 years. 16. But even imprisoned, Eleanor's influence seeps through cracks like candle smoke. She writes letters, sends envoys, keeps her duchy in line. And when Henry dies, she returns to court stronger than ever. Now she rules as Queen Dowager, mother to the new king, Richard the Lionheart, who trusts her with everything. When Richard goes on crusade, Eleanor runs the kingdom in his absence. She negotiates marriages, raises ransoms, oversees taxes, and still has time to encourage poetry and learning in her court. She is in her 70s at this point. You find her now in the gardens of Fontevraud Abbey, cloaked in wool, hair streaked with silver. She's quiet, watching monks rake gravel into spirals. But behind those eyes is a lifetime of rebellion, negotiation, love, exile, and poetry. Eleanor of Aquitaine died in 1204, around the age of 82. She lived through 2 crusades, 2 crowns, imprisonment, rebellion, and dynasties. And through it all, she remained unbowed. She wasn't just a queen. She was the mother of kings, the patron of poets, the force behind one of Europe's most complicated eras. The bells of the abbey toll now, soft and slow, and Eleanor's shadow folds gently into the stone. But far to the north, another woman stirs, less duchess, more dagger. She rides not to courts, but to coastlines. And though her name might be tangled in myth, her legacy roars like a storm across the sea. Her name is Lagertha, and she is the Viking flame that refuses to die. You're standing on a rocky cliff in Scandinavia, sometime in the 9th century. The sea below churns and crashes like a beast in a cage. There's mist on the water, thick and cold, but it parts as a shape approaches. Long and sleek, with oars slicing the waves like teeth, a Viking ship cuts through the fog, and standing at its bow is a woman. Her cloak is lined with bare fur. Her hands rest on the hilt of a sword etched with runes. Wind tangles her pale hair as she stares down the coastline, not blinking. She doesn't need to. She's already conquered it, if not in body, then in memory. Her name is Lagertha. And yes, historians still argue whether she was real or legend, whether she fought battles or just fought her way into the sagas. But honestly, when you meet her like this in silence and wind, in myth, does it matter? She was first recorded in the 12th century Gesta Danorum by Saxo Grammaticus, a Danish historian with a flair for drama and no interest in downplaying a woman's war record. According to him, Lagertha was a shield maiden, a warrior woman of the Viking world. She rode into battle with braided hair and iron resolve. She killed with precision and loved with power. Your boots crunch across wet gravel as you follow her inland. There's smoke ahead, war smoke, the kind that rises from torched villages and blackened thatch. Lagertha's homeland has been attacked by King Fro of Sweden, who deposed her family and humiliated the women of her clan. So she does what any self-respecting Viking heroine would do. She raises an army. She's said to have fought alongside Ragnar Lothbrok, the legendary Norse hero who needs no introduction. They battle side by side, and according to Saxo, Lagertha turns the tide when the men falter. She charges, helmet flashing, blood flying, and earns Ragnar's awe, and for a time, his heart. He courts her, but Lagertha doesn't swoon. In fact, she sets a bear and a wolf outside her house to test his courage. That's right, an actual bear, plus a wolf, just to make sure he's worth her time. A quirky footnote? Definitely. But also revealing. Lagertha doesn't wait to be chosen. She chooses. Eventually, she marries Ragnar and bears him children. They live as warrior partners until he leaves her. Yes, he leaves. For another woman, a princess. It's all very saga soap opera. But here's the thing. Lagertha doesn't collapse. She returns to Norway, takes control of her own lands, and when her new husband mistreats her, she kills him with a spear hidden under her dress. Yes, really. Saxo writes, Lagertha, who had formerly been the boldest of Amazons, slew her husband with a concealed spearhead and thus restored her freedom. That's not just drama. That's self-determination with pointy accessories. You stand now at the edge of a battlefield. The grass is red. The sky is dark. Lagertha rides in from the east with 50 ships, and banners snapping in the wind. Her warriors chant. Her enemies tremble. She doesn't shout. She doesn't need to. She's already become more than a woman. She's a symbol. Historians and archaeologists still debate the existence of shield maidens. Skeptics once scoffed, no armor, no graves, no evidence. But then came the Birka warrior burial, discovered in Sweden. A high-ranking warrior, buried with full weapons, armor, and 2 horses, initially identified as male, until DNA testing in 2017 revealed she was female. A woman, a warrior, a general, possibly. It's not proof that Lagertha lived, but it is proof that women fought. A lead, commanded, and if one existed, maybe more did. Maybe Lagertha wasn't an invention. Maybe she was an echo. You find her now in the Hall of Memory, where sagas are sung and horns overflow with mead, where poets remember her with admiration and warriors invoke her name before battle. In recent years, she's been reborn in novels, television, murals, sometimes romanticized, sometimes weaponized, but never forgotten. She represents more than a sword. She represents choice. The choice to fight, to rule, to walk away, to return. You look at her across the firelight. She nods once, sharp and clean, and then she turns toward the wind again, because shield maidens don't rest. They ride. The storm recedes now. The longships drift into fog. But inland, across the Alps, another woman sharpens her mind and prepares to enter a different kind of battle. One fought not with swords, but with papal letters, imperial troops, and political cunning. Her name is Matilda of Tuscany, and she's about to remind the Holy Roman Emperor who really rules the mountains. You find yourself in the heart of northern Italy, sometime in the 11th century. The land is rough, all pine forests and stone bridges, but beautiful, full of hidden abbeys, hilltop fortresses, and vineyards that stretch like fingers toward the sky. And there on horseback, wearing a velvet riding cloak and boots muddied from days of travel, rides Matilda. She's not smiling, but there's a fire in her eyes, the kind that doesn't burn out when a battle ends. This is a woman who fights with loyalty and leverage. Matilda of Tuscany, sometimes called La Gran Contessa, was born in 1046 to a powerful dynasty in central Italy. Her father was Boniface, a margrave with extensive lands. Her mother, Beatrice, descended from kings. Matilda was their only surviving child, one of those rare girls who, by sheer circumstance and sharper than average brains, inherited everything. By the age of 9, she was already learning not just prayers and etiquette, but the laws of landholding, siege warfare, and political marriage. And true to medieval form, she was married off at 12. But here's where things start to break the mold. Her first husband died. So did her second. And rather than step aside and retire to a life of embroidery and piety, Matilda took full control of her territories. That included most of Tuscany, Lombardy, Emilia, and parts of Umbria, a huge stretch of land critical to the power struggles between the Holy Roman Empire and the papacy. This is where you take a deep breath, because Matilda isn't just a noblewoman. She's about to become one of the key players in the investiture controversy, a decades-long political and spiritual showdown between emperors and popes over who got to appoint bishops. Sounds dry? It isn't. It's Game of Thrones with miters. You stand with her now in a candlelit hall at Canossa, winter howling at the shutters. The year is 1077. Outside the gates, barefoot in the snow, kneels Emperor Henry IV. Yes, kneels. In the snow. For 3 days. Why? Because Matilda sided with Pope Gregory VII, offering him protection from Henry's armies when the emperor tried to remove him from power. Matilda gave the Pope her castles, her soldiers, and most importantly, her legitimacy. With her help, Gregory excommunicated Henry, which, in the medieval world, is a cosmic slap in the face. Henry, desperate to reclaim control, came to beg forgiveness in person. Matilda hosted the event, quietly, politely, but she never forgot the message. Without her fortress walls, the Pope had nowhere to stand. It's one of the most famous scenes in medieval European history, an emperor barefoot in the snow, waiting for absolution at the gates of a woman's castle. Historians still debate how much power Matilda truly wielded that day. Was she merely a host, or a key architect of the drama? Spoiler alert, probably both. And she wasn't done. Throughout her life, Matilda commanded troops against imperial forces. She personally led military campaigns in northern Italy, defending the Papal States against multiple invasions. She rode into battle in armor, sword at her side, not just as a figurehead, but as a general. There is a lesser-known tale where Matilda reportedly disguised herself as a common foot soldier during one skirmish, so she could slip behind enemy lines and direct strategy without being targeted. You chuckle now, imagining her yanking off a helmet mid-battle to issue orders. The kind of twist that would make even Lagertha nod in respect. And yet, she wasn't just a warrior. She was also a patron of art and faith, founding abbeys, commissioning manuscripts, and corresponding regularly with religious thinkers across Europe. She could quote Boethius, argue with monks, and then turn around and outmaneuver the emperor's taxmen before lunch. Matilda never had children of her own, but she saw herself as a guardian of the church, and her legacy outlived any bloodline. When she died in 1115, childless, her lands eventually became part of the Papal States. And in a rare and striking move, her remains were transferred to St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, centuries later. She is one of only a handful of women buried there. The Vatican called her the Light of Italy. Not bad for a mountain Margravine who started her political career as a teenager. You stand now in one of her old castles. The stones are damp with age, but the air is thick with memory. Matilda's banner once golden with a red cross flutters faintly in your mind's eye. And somewhere in the valley below, another army begins to rise. But this one isn't marching. It's riding. A quill replaces the sword now. The battlefield becomes parchment. And in a quiet study tucked in a French court, another woman is picking up a pen ready to fight back with rhyme and reason. Her name is Christine de Pizan, and she's about to answer centuries of silence with a city built only for women. You step into a warm room lit by the glow of beeswax candles. A fire crackles in the corner, its heat curling around piles of parchment, quills, and bound volumes stacked like miniature towers on a carved wooden desk. Outside, the streets of early 15th century Paris are thick with noise tavern songs, horse hooves, sermons, and the chatter of men who believe the world belongs to them. Inside this room, though, the world is being quietly rewritten. Christine dips her pen, lifts it, and writes a sentence that will echo for centuries. The ink is brown-black, thick and slow. The words are fast, sharp, and dangerous. She isn't just writing about women. She's writing for them. Christine de Pizan was born in 1364 in Venice, Italy, to a scholar father who served as court astrologer to the King of France. That's right, astrologer. This was the era when kings consulted star charts as often as generals. When Christine was still a child, her father moved the family to Paris to join the royal court. Christine grew up surrounded by scrolls, philosophers, theologians, and poets. She learned Latin. She read history. She listened. And while most girls her age were preparing for marriage or convent life, Christine was preparing for a different path, one she wouldn't choose, but one she would master. At 15, she married Etienne du Castel, a royal secretary. It was a happy marriage, by most accounts. But then, tragedy. First, her father died, then her husband. Within a few years, Christine found herself widowed, with 3 children, a niece, and her elderly mother to care for, and no income. Most women in her position would have remarried. Christine picked up a pen instead. She began writing poetry for patrons at court, elegant, melancholic verse about love and grief. Her talent was undeniable. Soon she was composing ballads, political commentaries, biographies, and letters. She became Europe's first professional woman writer. Let that sink in. Not a noblewoman writing in secret, not a nun copying texts, but a paid, independent, public female author. In the 1400s, you walk with her now through the pages of her most famous work, the Book of the City of Ladies. It begins with Christine sitting at her desk, depressed and furious after reading yet another man's claim that women are weak, foolish, and morally corrupt by nature. The Offender, a popular book by a male scholar, one of many. Instead of crying, she responds with construction. She imagines 3 allegorical women, reason, rectitude, and justice appearing before her. They instruct her to build a city, stone by stone, to house history's most honorable, wise, and powerful women. And she does. In this city of ladies, you meet Sappho, the poet, Deborah, the biblical judge, Semiramis, the Assyrian queen, and dozens more female philosophers, scientists, warriors, saints. Christine isn't just praising them. She's proving a point. Women have always shaped the world. History just forgot to write it down. And now, she's doing the remembering. It's bold, subversive, even a little bit funny. Here's a quirky line from the book. Do not imagine, dear ladies, that your worth derives from the opinion of men who have not studied anything beyond their own noses. Mic drop, 1405. Historians still argue whether Christine was a feminist by modern standards. Some point out that she upheld many medieval ideas about female modesty, piety, and class roles. But in her time, what she did was radical. She didn't just advocate for women. She defended their intelligence, their dignity, and their place in history. And she did so in dialogue with men. One of her most famous public spats was with Jean de Meun, author of the Roman de la Rose, a wildly popular poem that portrayed women as manipulative and immoral. Christine called him out in writing, sparking a literary debate that lasted for years. Imagine the 15th century Twitter war, but with quills and parchment instead of hashtags. You sit now beside her desk. The candlelight flickers across her face. Her expression is focused, serene, a little sad. She knows her city isn't real. But the power of writing, of building a world on your own terms, isn't lost on her. In her later years, she wrote the Book of the Deeds of Charles V, a biography of the late king. And then, remarkably, she came out of retirement to write one final piece, a poem praising Joan of Arc, the only known contemporary work about Joan written by a woman. Christine, now in her 60s, saw in Joan the living embodiment of the City of Ladies, a real breathing warrior, proving everything she had ever argued. She died shortly after, likely around 1430, her final words lost to time, but her books preserved in over 50 manuscripts, rare for any medieval writer, let alone a woman. And tonight, in this little candlelit room, her city still stands. You can hear the footsteps of its citizens, queens and saints, mothers and mystics, voices rising where silence once ruled. The ink fades now, the quill rests. But in a sun-drenched kingdom to the east, another woman sharpens not her words, but her will ready to unite crowns and clash with faith, one conquest at a time. Her name is Isabella of Castile, and her empire begins where parchment ends on the battlefield and across the sea. You're standing on a balcony overlooking the plains of 15th century Castile. The sun is bright, golden like pressed olive oil, and the air hums with the slow throb of horses' hooves and distant bells. The palace behind you is alive with silk, steel, and politics. This is Spain, but not yet the Spain you know. The country is still fractured, split into rival kingdoms: Castile, Aragon, Granada, Navarre. And in this moment of division, a girl is preparing to bind it all together with marriage, war, and a plan so vast it will stretch across continents. Her name is Isabella. Born in 1451 to the ruling family of Castile, Isabella was never expected to rule. She had 2 brothers ahead of her in the line of succession. But fate, as it often does in royal stories, had other ideas. Her older brother died. Her younger brother, King Henry IV, became king and became infamous for his indecision, his scandal-ridden court, and his rumored impotence. And suddenly, Isabella was no longer just a princess in the shadows. She was a potential heir and a pawn. But Isabella refused to be played. From a young age, she was described as serious, pious, and terrifyingly composed. She believed in divine right, personal virtue, and unlike many nobles of her time, self-control. She was educated in Latin, religion, and court diplomacy. And when political factions tried to marry her off to foreign kings or shady allies, she said no, repeatedly, until she said yes. At 18, she secretly married Ferdinand of Aragon, heir to a neighboring kingdom, against the wishes of her half-brother. She didn't ask for permission, she simply acted. Their union would change the map of Europe. You walk beside her now through the halls of Segovia, where, in 1474, she is declared Queen of Castile after her brother's death. Not consort, not regent, queen, in her own right. She doesn't sit quietly on the throne. Together with Ferdinand, her equal in ambition, she sets out to unite Spain under one crown. But it's not just a love story. It's a joint reign, a strategic alliance, and sometimes a cold, calculated partnership. The 2 rule together, but their realms are governed separately. Still, every coin bears both their faces. Every royal decree requires both signatures. They call themselves the Catholic monarchs, and their mission becomes clear: unify Spain under one church, one language, one law. That brings us to the Reconquista. You hear it in the distance first, the sound of drums, horses, hammers on siege towers. The Kingdom of Granada, the last Muslim stronghold in Spain, has been holding out for centuries. But Isabella is determined. She rides into camps, negotiates terms with commanders, and funds the war with clever taxes and borrowed coin, including loans from Jewish financiers. For nearly 10 years, the campaign stretches on, city by city, fortress by fortress. And in 1492, her armies take Granada. The reconquest is over, but the legacy is complicated. That same year, Isabella signs the Alhambra Decree, expelling Jews from Spain unless they convert. Many do publicly. Others flee. Some go into hiding, forming the network of crypto-Jews who preserve their traditions in secret. Historians still debate the motives behind the decree: religious fervor, political control, or simple scapegoating. But one thing is certain. Isabella believed she was purifying her kingdom, and her version of unity came at a high cost. And yet, 1492 isn't over, because that same year, Christopher Columbus, a Genoese navigator with wild ambitions and a terrible sense of geography, gets an audience with Isabella. She listens, weighs the risk, and eventually agrees to fund his voyage west just in case. He sails. He stumbles into the Americas, and Isabella's crown becomes linked with an empire that will reshape the globe, for better and for much, much worse. You stand beside her now in Toledo, her court filled with scholars, priests, artists, and diplomats. She's wearing a high, starched wimple and a cloak trimmed in gold. Her hands are clasped over a letter. Her back is straight, She looks tired, but unyielding. Hear us a curious little detail. Isabella was known to travel with her own library, dozens of volumes packed in trunks from city to city. She believed that ruling a kingdom required knowledge, not just bloodlines. A rare sentiment in an age when most queens weren't expected to rule, let alone think. She also founded schools, reformed the legal code, and insisted her daughters be educated as thoroughly as her sons. One of those daughters, Catherine of Aragon, would marry into English royalty and become the first wife of Henry VIII. You know how that turns out. When Isabella died in 1504, her will stated that her body should be buried simply, without excessive gold or grandeur. She left behind a kingdom transformed, unified, yes, but also divided by the very zeal that had empowered it. She was praised as a saint by some, condemned as a fanatic by others. And tonight, in the hush between midnight and memory, you remember her as a woman who defied her king, ruled beside her husband, crowned her own name in steel, and cracked the map of the world with a signature. The torches of Toledo dim, the banners are folded, but across the channel, in a rain-soaked kingdom fractured by civil war, another woman waits, gentle by birth, but forged by blood. Her name is Margaret of Anjou, and she's about to step into a game of thrones with no rules and no mercy. The sky above England is gray, as usual. Clouds hang like wet wool, and the wind carries the sharp scent of smoke, steel, and something darker tension. You're standing just beyond the drawbridge of a 15th century castle. Its stones are cold. Its gates are closed. Inside, a war is brewing, not between kings and rebels, but inside a royal household. And at its center is a queen, uncrowned in her heart, crowned in her ambition. Margaret of Anjou was born in 1430 in the Kingdom of Naples, southern Italy. Her early life was royal, but not remarkable. She was educated in courtly matters, fluent in French, and trained, like most noble daughters, to marry well and stay quiet. That didn't last. At the age of 15, she was betrothed to Henry VI of England, a king known less for leadership and more for long silences and spiritual brooding. His counselors hoped the French bride would cement a truce in the 100 Years' War. Instead, they got a queen who would drag England into civil war. You walk beside her now as she enters Westminster, her dark eyes spanning the stone walls. Henry greets her gently. He's delicate, sweet, even, but also distant, disconnected, sometimes silent for hours, sometimes lost in prayer, sometimes simply gone. Margaret senses the instability immediately. She's a teenager in a foreign land. The court is cold, the politics colder, but she plays the game fast, smart, strategic. And when Henry begins to suffer full episodes of catatonia, possibly schizophrenia, possibly severe depression, Margaret steps in. She becomes more than queen. She becomes the kingdom's anchor. And in 1453, she gives birth to a son, Edward of Westminster, the long-awaited heir. That might have secured her position, if not for one thing. No one really believed Henry fathered the child. Rumors swirl, whispered in corridors, scribbled in court records, that Margaret took a lover, that she forged the line of succession, that she was too powerful, too political, too foreign. You've heard this song before? And the kingdom? It's breaking apart. England plunges into the Wars of the Roses, a brutal dynastic feud between the houses of Lancaster and York. Blood in the streets. Nobles changing sides mid-battle. Brothers fighting brothers. And Margaret? She doesn't run. She raises an army. With her young son in tow, she rides across England, forging alliances, rallying troops. She negotiates with Scotland, France, Wales, anyone who will stand with Lancaster. Historians still argue whether she was a protector of the crown or an unofficial ruler in her own right. Either way, she wasn't hiding behind tapestries. She was commanding generals, planning routes, and leading war councils. You ride with her now across the muddy fields of Toten, one of the bloodiest battles in English history. Snow falls. The fighting is savage. The Lancastrians are crushed. Still, Margaret doesn't stop. She flees north, regathers, returns. She's described as lion-hearted by her allies, vicious and unnatural by her enemies. The chroniclers of her time mostly male paint her as everything from a demon to a seductress to a scheming foreigner. She is called She-Wolf of France. But look closer. She was doing what every nobleman around her was doing, fighting for her child's right to rule. The only difference? She didn't have a beard. Here is a fringe tidbit. There is a preserved letter from Margaret where she offers a castle in return for military support. Her handwriting is sharp, her tone precise. There's no apology, no softness. She knows exactly what power costs and what it buys. In 1461, her son Edward is declared Prince of Wales by her faction. In 1470, briefly, Henry is restored to the throne, thanks to her efforts. But the victory doesn't last. In 1471, at the Battle of Tewkesbury, her forces are finally defeated by Edward IV of York. Her 17-year-old son is captured and killed, possibly executed in cold blood. Henry VI is murdered shortly after. And Margaret? She's taken prisoner, moved from castle to castle. Years of quiet captivity. You find her now in a dim room at Windsor. The tapestries are faded. Her hands tremble. Her eyes are empty, but not broken. She is eventually ransomed back to France, where she lives out her final years in near poverty, cared for by distant relatives. She dies in 1482, mostly forgotten, her voice silenced, her name stained by war. And yet, tonight, you remember her not as a she-wolf or a pawn. You remember her as a mother who defied armies, rode into fire, and refused to surrender a throne she believed belonged to her child. The bells of Krakow fade into silence. The frost on the stone softens. But far to the north, where winters stretch endlessly and kings ride with war in their blood, another woman waits not behind church walls, but beside fire and sword. Her name is Sigrid, and she doesn't kneel for crowns. She burns them. You're deep in the Nordic twilight now, where the wind howls through pine forests and the rivers crack with ice. This is the land of sagas, where myths and monarchs overlap like furs on a shield wall. You step into a longhouse dimly lit by torchlight, the air thick with smoke, pine resin, and roasting boar. At the far end of the room, seated beneath an ornately carved beam, is Sigrid the Haughty. She's not smiling. That would be far too generous for the mood tonight. Her hair is braided with silver rings. Her fingers toy with the hilt of a ceremonial dagger. And beside her throne, a fire pit crackles not for warmth, but as a warning. Sigrid's real name may have been Gwajtasawa, a Polish princess, or Gunhild, or possibly something else entirely, because historians still argue who she was. The Icelandic sagas give her the name Sigrid the Haughty, and the stories they tell? Cold-blooded, regal, unforgettable. You're here for the bonfire incident. And yes, it's exactly what it sounds like. According to the Heimskringla, a legendary collection of Norse kings' sagas, Sigrid ruled Sweden after the death of her husband, Eric the Victorious. As Queen Dowager, she controlled lands, influence, and most valuable of all herself. That didn't sit well with a line of suitors who thought she'd make a convenient political trophy. She entertained their proposals, smiled, poured them ale, and then she burned them alive in her hall. You flinch at the thought, but the sagas deliver it casually, almost admiringly. Two overconfident nobles, likely drunk on both mead and their own importance, refuse to leave after she declines their proposals. So she tells her men to bar the doors and light the building. She watches from outside. They become smoke. She becomes legend. Now, Is it true? Probably not exactly as told. Even medieval storytellers knew how to punch up a tale. But the message is clear. Sigrid doesn't accept terms. She sets them. And she wasn't finished. In the years following, Sigrid received an offer from none other than Olaf Tryggvason, King of Norway and newly converted Christian. He came north bearing not only a marriage proposal, but a condition that she too convert. Sigrid looked him in the eye and gave him the most polite version of absolutely not the Viking world had ever seen. When he pushed her hard, she pushed back harder. "I will not part from the faith of my forefathers," she reportedly said, "and I do not intend to marry a man who is so arrogant that he would force me to abandon my gods. Keep your crown and your cross, Olaf." He slapped her. She said nothing. But years later, she reportedly engineered his downfall by arranging the alliance of Denmark, Sweden, and the Slavic kingdoms that defeated Olaf at sea. Coincidence? Historians debate it. But in Saga world, that was her checkmate. You sit now at the edge of her firelight, watching her sip her ale, surrounded by warriors who respect her, not because she rules softly, but because she doesn't flinch. Sigrid is known for saying no more than yes, for outmaneuvering every man who tried to own her, and for wielding indifference like a blade. She was, quite possibly, the mother of kings. Some believe she gave birth to Canute the Great, who would go on to rule England, Denmark, and Norway. If true, her bloodline reshaped Northern Europe. But even if the genealogies are cloudy, the tailies are not. She endures in story after story, stubborn, brilliant, beautiful, and terrifying. The type of queen who doesn't send messengers. She sends warnings, and if you fail to listen, well, there's always kindling. Here is a lesser-known footnote. Some scholars argue that Sigrid may have had multiple identities, depending on the region Polish princes. Slavic diplomat, Norse ruler. Her haughtiness, they suggest, was actually diplomatic caution, shaped by surviving in a man's world at a time, when alliances turned to blood with a single misstep. But legend doesn't care for nuance. It remembers her as a storm in velvet cold as the Baltic, fierce as the gods, and impossible to forget. The fire dies low now, the longhouse dims. But far across the Alps, in a world lit not by war or wrath, but by the glow of parchment and vision, another woman lifts her eyes, not toward crowns, but toward the sky. Her name is Hildegard, and when she speaks, the earth listens. You're standing in a walled garden in the Rhineland, Germany. The sun is just rising, casting soft gold over rows of herbs, lavender, yarrow, rosemary planted with precision and care. You hear a melody, too gentle to be earthly, drifting through the morning mist. And then, footsteps soft leather, deliberate. A figure in a pale habit moves past you, collecting dew-covered petals in a woven basket. This is Hildegard of Bingen, and she sees what others don't. Born in 1098, the 10th child of a noble family, Hildegard was offered to the church at age 8 tithed like land or coin. She entered the Benedictine monastery at Disibodenberg, where she would spend most of her life cloistered, quiet, and watching. Because from the time she was young, Hildegard saw visions. Brilliant lights, mandalas of flame, structures made of color and sound. She later described them as the living light. At first, she kept them secret. Visions weren't exactly encouraged, especially in women. But as she grew, they became impossible to hide. And then, in her 40s decades into monastic life, she said the divine told her to write. So she did. With trembling hands, she began composing what would become Civius, a sprawling, illustrated manuscript mapping the cosmos, theology, and the human soul. In a time when women were not expected to publish at all, she not only wrote, she dared to interpret scripture. She claimed her visions weren't dreams or delusions. They were revelations. Here's something curious. She even wrote the Pope, sent him her manuscript, asked for approval, and he gave it. Not only that, Bernard of Clairvaux, a major church figure, defended her. She was declared divinely inspired. With papal blessing, Hildegard became a rare thing. A woman authorized to preach. Yes, a female preacher in the 12th century. You're with her now as she moves through her convent, founding her own abbey at Rupertsberg, planting orchards, managing finances, composing chants that still echo through cathedrals today. Her music wasn't ordinary liturgy. It soared, complex, ethereal, written not to follow tradition, but to translate heaven. One chant, O vis aeternitatis, O power within eternity, still stuns scholars with its structure and spiritual depth. And then there's her healing. Hildegard wrote extensively on herbal medicine, natural science, and female anatomy. Her medical texts like Physica and Causa et Curie were centuries ahead of their time. She detailed remedies, explained the body's humors, and even described the menstrual disorders, a topic few dared touch, let alone document. Historians still argue whether her science was based in observation or inherited Greco-Roman knowledge. Likely both. But what's clear is that she saw no boundary between nature and God. To Hildegard, the world itself was a kind of living scripture. And through it all, her visions continued. She described glowing cities, cosmic eggs, spinning spheres full of eyes and wings images, now used in everything from psychedelic art to neuroscience textbooks. Hildegard's brain, some modern scholars suggest, may have processed migraines or synesthesia, but she experienced those flashes as sacred. You sit with her now in the scriptorium, watching her dictate to a monk, her hands folded as if in prayer, her voice calm but firm. She's not a mystic lost in clouds. She's sharp, political. She writes letters to emperors. She chastises corrupt bishops. She scolds nobles for oppressing the poor. When one archbishop tried to bury an excommunicated noble on convent grounds, she refused, even under threat of interdict. She was nearly excommunicated herself, but held firm. And eventually, the church relented. That's quiet power. Here's a lovely aside. Hildegard coined the term viridis Latin for greenness. But she didn't just mean plants. She meant the divine vitality that flows through all living things. Growth, renewal, sacred energy in sap and soul. She died in 1179 at the age of 81. Monks reported 2 halos of light appearing in the sky that night. In 2012, 833 years later, the Vatican officially canonized her and declared her a doctor of the Church, a title held by only a few dozen people, and only 4 women. Tonight, the cloister falls still. The candles burn low. But Hildegard's chants float through time like wind in a chapel notes written for heaven, but hummed here on earth. The visions fade now. The parchment closes. But far across the channel, in the shadowed halls of Tudor power, 2 sisters circle one throne fire in their hearts, daggers in their eyes. One named Mary, the other Elizabeth. And between them, the fate of England. You're walking through the candlelit corridors of Hampton Court, where tapestries whisper of secrets, and the eyes in portraits seem to follow you. The year is 1553, and the throne of England is not so much inherited as contested, with tears, steel, and fire. At the heart of it all are 2 daughters of Henry VIII. Same father. Very different destinies. First, there's Mary Tudor, daughter of Henry's first wife, Catherine of Aragon. She's devout, solemn, Spanish in blood and spirit. Her faith, unshakable. Her childhood, torn to shreds by her father's need for a male heir. You pass her now in your mind, once a princess, then illegitimized after Henry divorced her mother, forced to call her own mother Dowager Princess, and swear that her parents' marriage had never been valid, that she herself was a mistake. She never forgot that, and she never forgave it. Then comes Elizabeth, daughter of Anne Boleyn, Henry's second wife, brilliant, razor-witted, fluent in Latin by 10. Raised in caution and calculation, her mother executed before her 3rd birthday. Elizabeth learned quickly. Survival came not from tears, but from tact. And yet both of them would wear the same crown. "You're with Mary now," as she claims the throne in a dramatic sweep ousting the teenage pretender Lady Jane Grey, who ruled for 9 days. The people cheer, at first. Mary is England's first reigning queen. A monumental moment. But it comes with weight. She sets out to restore Catholicism, reverse her father's Reformation, and secure her legacy with a Catholic heir. She marries Philip II of Spain, much to England's unease. And then, the fires begin. Over 280 Protestants are burned during her reign, priests, commoners, scholars, men and women alike. The executions are public. The air reeks of ash and horror. Her enemies begin to call her Bloody Mary. Historians still argue. Was she more brutal than the kings before her? Or simply held to a harsher spotlight because of her gender? Regardless, the name stuck. The throne grew colder. And Elizabeth waited. You're with Elizabeth in the Tower of London now, held under suspicion of plotting rebellion. She's young, pale, reading Cicero by candlelight. The walls feel too close. The guards never blink. One misstep and she's next, but she doesn't misstep. In 1558, Mary dies childless, heartbroken, her health ruined, and Elizabeth steps onto the throne. You hear the difference instantly. Elizabeth doesn't shout. She performs. She wears pearls, ruffles, 1,000 layers of symbolism. She calls herself the Virgin Queen, married to her people. Her court is full of poets, explorers, spies. Shakespeare will write under her gaze. Francis Drake will sail the globe. She reinstates Protestantism, but carefully. She doesn't burn her enemies. She plays them. She survives assassination plots, foreign threats, the Spanish Armada, and all the while, she refuses to marry not out of chastity, perhaps, but strategy. A husband would mean a co-ruler. Elizabeth preferred her own terms. Here's a curious tidbit. Elizabeth used scent as a political weapon. Her chambers were filled with rosemary, rose oil, and orange blossoms. Her gloves were perfumed. Her presence was always intentional, like a living icon. And yet, behind the glitter and wit, she carried scars. She had her cousin Mary, Queen of Scots, executed after years of house arrest. She watched favorites die. She aged alone, her teeth blackened by sugar, her face painted pale as porcelain. She ruled for 45 years. Mary reigned for just over 5. Yet both shaped England, one in agony, the other in theater. You sit now in Westminster Abbey, where they are both buried. Together, in a single tomb, one atop the other sisters in marble, if not in life. The inscription mentions only Elizabeth. But tonight, you remember them both. Mary, with her torch held too close to the flame. Elizabeth, with her mask too perfect to remove. 2 women, 1 crown, and a kingdom still echoing with their footsteps. The throne falls still, the masks lower. But across the channel and deep into the gilded heart of France, another woman waits not with armies or sermons, but with steady eyes and a silence sharper than steel. Her name is Maria Theresa of Spain. And though her husband was called the Sun King, she cast a shadow all his own. You're gliding now through the candlelit corridors of Versailles, where everything glitters, but nothing feels warm. Crystal chandeliers shimmer overhead. Footsteps echo off polished marble. Perfume lingers in the air, as heavy and sweet as secrecy. The French court in the 17th century is a theater of power. Every glance is choreography. Every gown is strategy. And at the very center of it, all draped in brocade, crowned in pearls, yet almost invisible to history, sits Maria Theresa of Spain. She was born in 1638, an infanta of the powerful Spanish Habsburgs, during a time when alliances were as fragile as lace. Her father was Philip IV of Spain, her mother a Habsburg cousin. Her childhood was marked by rituals, rosaries, and silence. She learned to curtsy before she could run, to bless herself before she could speak. At age 6, she was engaged to her cousin Louis XIV of France, though years of war between their families kept the marriage from happening. When peace finally came, it was sealed not by treaties, but by her hand. In 1660, Maria Theresa married Louis in a lavish ceremony meant to symbolize harmony between empires. The French called her Marie Thérèse. She brought with her a dowry so large it nearly emptied the Spanish treasury, and a clause that would later spark the War of Spanish Succession. But for now, she is simply Queen of France, and yet she is not. Not truly, because Louis, barely 22, already shines too brightly. And Maria Theresa? She learns to endure his light and his shadows. You see her now in a gown stitched with Spanish modesty, standing quietly beside her husband as he dazzles the court with wit, dancing, and politics. She smiles. She curtsies, but she says little. Louis surrounds himself with lovers Madame de Montespan, Madame de Maintenon, brilliant, witty, and calculating women who form the real inner circle of Versailles. Maria Theresa is excluded politely, completely, but she never complains. The courtiers whisper about her Spanish stiffness, her poor French, her quiet piety. But beneath that quiet is a kind of resilience even the Sun King cannot bend. Here's a curious footnote. Despite being sidelined at court, Maria Theresa was beloved by the common people. They saw her as pious, faithful, and sympathetic, a rare stillness in a court that spun too fast. She visited the sick. She protected servants, and she never sought to retaliate against her husband's mistresses. She bore 6 children, though only one Louis, the Grand Dauphin, survived into adulthood. The losses left her subdued, her eyes often cast downward in portraits. And yet she continued, day after day, fulfilling her role as queen with dignity so quiet it was nearly invisible. You walk with her through the hall of mirrors, her footsteps soft against marble. She's not here to scheme or charm. She's here because duty called her. She ruled France alone during Louis's military campaigns, briefly, but capably. She hosted foreign dignitaries, settled disputes among courtiers, and ensured that the enormous machinery of Versailles didn't fall apart while the Sun King was away. But even when she held power, she never claimed it. Historians still debate whether this was submission or strategy, because Maria Theresa knew how courts worked. She saw what happened to women who overreached. Instead, she remained present, consistent, unimpeachable. No scandal, no rumors, just faith and presence. She died in 1683, just 44 years old. Louis wept. He is reported to have said, "This is the only trouble she has ever given me." A cold line, or maybe a confession, because even kings, eventually, understand what they lost. You stand beside her tomb now in the Basilica of St. Denis, where France's monarchs sleep beneath centuries of stone. Her epitaph is modest, her memory faint in most history books. But tonight, you remember her, not as a shadow, not as a silence, but as a steady flame in a court of fireworks. A woman who endured the world's most golden prison and never let it break her. The palace grows still now, the mirrors dim, and across time's quiet bridge, we return once more not to a woman defined by silence, but to one who chose it deliberately, defiantly, like a curtain falling on a stage. Her name is Christina of Sweden, and when the world begged her to rule, she quietly walked away. The wind is colder here. You're far north again, in 17th century Sweden, where the snow falls straight and slow, and even the shadows seem to wear furs. You pass under a stone archway dusted in frost, and beyond it lies a palace grand, but spare. No velvet flattery here. No golden fountains. Just pine wood, flint, and a hush that feels older than monarchy itself. Inside, you find Christina, not yet the figure of scandal and reinvention she will become, but a girl on a throne that came to her far too early. She was born in 1626 to King Gustavus Adolphus, the famed Lion of the North. Her birth disappointed some her gender, but she was raised with a royal education anyway. Latin before breakfast, Aristotle before bed. Her father called her his son, in all but name. Then, at just 6 years old, Christina became Queen Regnant, the ruling monarch of Sweden, after her father died in battle during the 30 Years' War. She would not simply marry into power, she would be power. And yet, she never quite seemed to want it. You walk with her now, through the austere corridors of Tre Kroner Palace, where tapestries are few and bookshelves plentiful. Christina surrounded herself with scholars, philosophers, and scientists. She adored Descartes, whom she invited to Sweden only for him to die from the cold, ironically, after being made to lecture before dawn. Here as a delightful oddity, she once ordered an indoor ice skating floor, but also refused to heat the palace properly. Sweden's intellectual elite spent the winter freezing for the sake of philosophy. Christina read everything. She debated theology, studied history, and collected art with a passion usually reserved for royalty's other favorite hobby, conquering. But what she didn't collect: husbands. She refused to marry. Repeatedly, calmly, permanently. Courtiers whispered. Theologians trembled. A queen was supposed to produce heirs, not manuscripts. But Christina held her own. She dressed in what were often described as masculine clothes, walked with a confident stride, and openly declared her disgust for court life and ceremonial pretense. Was she queer? Was she simply eccentric? Historians still argue, of course. Some point to her unusually close relationships with women, others to her lifelong celibacy and interest in faith and aesthetics over romance. Christina defied every label her century tried to pin on her, because that's what revolutions do. And hers was quiet, deliberate, and complete. In 1654, at the age of just 27, Christina shocked Europe by abdicating the throne. She removed her crown, renounced her title, and left Sweden. Why? Because she wanted to convert to Catholicism forbidden in Protestant Sweden. And also, perhaps, because she simply wanted to live as herself, not as the royal mold demanded. You follow her now across Europe. Rome, Naples, Paris. She becomes something between a political exile and a celebrity. Popes invite her to banquets. Cardinals attempt to steer her. Artists sketch her. She lives in borrowed palaces and writes moody letters about politics, God, and the weather. She even tried to regain political relevance, briefly ruled over part of Naples, failed at a coup, shrugged it off, and continued on. But she never returned to Sweden. Instead, she became a patron of the arts, an occasional diplomat, and a living contradiction. A woman raised to rule, who walked away from power, but never lost her voice. You find her now in her later years, resting in a Roman villa. Her hair is silver. Her boots are still polished. Her mind? Still sharper than frostbite. She dies in 1689 at the age of 62. And here's the final curious twist. She is buried in St. Peter's Basilica, one of the only women granted that honor. A Protestant queen who became a Catholic icon. A runaway monarch laid to rest beside popes. Tonight, the snows of Stockholm drift quietly outside memory. The royal chambers of Tre Kroner are long gone burned centuries later. But somewhere in the silence, you still hear the soft clatter of books closing and a crown being set down with finality. She was a queen, but more than that, she was herself. The pages close now, the fires dim, the voices fall into echo. But far beyond Europe's courts, beyond frozen towers and gilded chapels, another queen rises, not from noble marriage, not from church blessing, but from defiance carved in earth and memory. Her name is Nzinga, and when her world was threatened, she didn't just survive. She outlasted it. You're standing now beneath the open skies of 17th century West Africa, where the sun hangs low over forests of acacia and groves of palm. The land is vast and fertile. The air is heavy with humidity, and the scent of smoke curls up from villages where pots boil over fire, and warriors sharpen spears for a fight that never seems to end. This is Ndongo and Matamba, part of what is now Angola, and the woman who commands it all. She steps from the shadows, not in silk, but in steel. This is Queen Nzinga, diplomat, tactician, warrior, and thorn in the side of European colonizers for over 4 decades. She was born around 1583 into the royal Bundu people. Her father, a king of Ndongo, raised her not as a decoration, but as an advisor. She learned early how to negotiate, how to spot weakness, and unusually how to read and write Portuguese, the language of the incoming colonizers. By the time her brother took the throne, the Portuguese had begun forcing brutal trade deals, enslaving locals, and destabilizing the kingdom. Nzinga stepped in not with armies, but with language. You're seated with her now in Luanda, at one of the most famous diplomatic meetings in African colonial history. Nzinga arrives to negotiate peace with the Portuguese governor. She walks into the room. The Portuguese sit. She stands, no chair is offered. So what does she do? She calmly signals to one of her attendants, who drops to all fours. Nzinga sits on the back of her servant, meeting the governor at eye level. No complaint, no apology. That single act, it said everything. From that moment on, they knew she wouldn't kneel. Her political brilliance didn't stop there. She negotiated temporary peace, converted to Christianity, and took the Christian name Ana de Souza. But the moment Portugal broke its promises, Nzinga retreated into the interior, regrouped, and began a decades-long guerrilla resistance. She allied with runaway slaves, former Portuguese soldiers, and rival tribes. She built fortresses deep in the jungle, trained women as soldiers, sent spies through Portuguese camps. She even declared herself king, not queen, over a combined territory, because some of her allies refused to follow a female monarch. So she became a male ruler in title, just to keep control. Historians still debate whether Nzinga's adaptability was pragmatic or radical. Was she a political realist? A freedom fighter? A royal survivor? Likely all three. What's certain is that she was feared, respected, and never ignored. Here is a quirky detail you want to find in most textbooks. Some accounts say Nzinga trained an elite guard of female warriors, much like the later Dahomey Amazons. Others claim she carried an axe-shaped staff and used it to cut down any challenger, literal or otherwise. Did she assassinate a rival sister to seize the throne? Possibly. Did she send spies posing as priests into Portuguese camps? Very likely. Nzinga ruled Matamba into her 70s, leading from horseback, conducting negotiations, and reorganizing the economy to avoid reliance on the slave trade. Her nation became a safe haven for escaped slaves and a staging ground for rebellion against the Portuguese Empire. She never surrendered. She died in 1663, over 80 years old, having fought colonizers, rival kings, internal betrayal, and centuries of bias, without ever giving them the satisfaction of breaking her. You stand now in the warm dusk of a Matamba courtyard. The drums are silent. The queen's canopy of red cloth flutters in the wind, and on the horizon you see the outline of a woman, seated proud, upright, unbent. She may be gone, but in the rhythm of resistance, in every kingdom that refuses to fall quietly, Nzinga reigns. The dust settles now, the sun dips low, and all around us these stories begin to breathe softer. The queens and saints, the warriors and poets, One final step remains. Let the noise fall away. Let the world dim. And let us drift together into the stillness they left behind. You lie still now. The voices of queens and saints, of scholars and soldiers, begin to slip into the folds of your breath, soft and slow, like smoke curling from a fading hearth. The pages have turned. The battles have quieted. And here, at the end of this long candlelit corridor through history, only the echoes remain. Gentle ones. Ones you can rest beside. You've walked through icy woods with queens who never wore their names easily. You've knelt beside abbesses whose power came in parchment, not steel. You've stood in marble halls while royal sisters weighed kingdoms against love and chose differently. And all the while, you've heard the same murmur beneath every crown. What does it mean to rule as a woman? In the medieval world, power was rarely handed to women. When it came wrapped in grief, or loss, or silence. An inherited throne from a dead husband. A battlefield left empty by a fleeing king. A court that needed a scapegoat or a saint. And yet they came one by one, cloaked in velvet, draped in armor, barefoot with scrolls in hand, not always loud, but never absent. Think back to Sigrid the Haughty, who said no with fire, to Jadwiga, crowned a king but remembered for mercy, to Lagertha, legend or not, who stormed through sagas with sword and storm air, and to Nzinga, who refused to kneel even when the world told her she should be grateful for scraps. They didn't just rule. They endured, not always kindly, not always gently, but with a bone-deep understanding that leadership is often colder than it looks from the outside. You remember the quiet ones, too. Christine de Pizan, building her city of ladies with ink instead of mortar. Hildegard, turning visions into songs that floated beyond cloisters. Maria Theresa, whose silence steadied the wildest court in Europe. They didn't chase power. They held it like a still bowl of water balanced carefully. They didn't shout. They wrote. They didn't charge into war. They held countries together with consistency, clarity, and quiet control. Let your breathing slow now. Let your mind drift to the softest scenes. To a candle burning in a stone-walled chamber, where a young princess traces Latin on a wax tablet, her fingers smudged with learning. To a battlefield after the charge, where a queen picks her way among the wounded, not to weep, but to command. To an abbey in the early hours, where mist curls through the cloisters, and a woman hums a hymn only she knows, composing not for applause, but for heaven. Let's walk back through some of their footsteps now, not to analyze, just to be near them. You remember Empress Theodora, who came from the dirt-floored streets of Constantinople a circus, and climbed step by brutal step to the throne of the Byzantine Empire. She rewrote the rules, passed laws, built shelters for women fleeing abuse. She stared down riots and emperors, and never asked for permission. Royalty was her shroud, yes, but also her armor. You wonder, did she ever miss the smell of sawdust and oranges from her stage days? Maybe. But she never looked back. Then you drift to Eleanor of Aquitaine, crossing the sea with her mind sharper than her jewels. She played marriage like chess, raised rebel sons, survived imprisonment, and still ran empires well into her 70s. She was dangerous, yes, but only to those who underestimated her, which was nearly everyone. Eleanor didn't ask to be liked. She asked to be heard, and she was. You recall Hilda of Whitby, gently stitching her abbey together with scripture and starlight. She didn't need a throne. Her influence spread through story, through study, through every woman who sat under her guidance and rose to meet the world braver than before. A queen of quiet things, the kind who made kingdoms last longer than banners. Let yourself relax further now. Your thoughts can wander. Let them blur the edges of names, of dates, of armor and ink. That's all right. These women aren't locked in history. They're drifting around you now, like whispers on parchment, like threads of wind through cathedral windows. They aren't monuments. They're moments, fleeting, fragile, and real. Remember how Matilda of Tuscany stared down emperors in the snow? How she defended a pope with swords drawn and letters sent? She didn't wear a crown most of the time, but even kings knelt in her shadow. Remember Margaret of Anjou, blood-soaked and unrelenting, who fought for a child, a name, a dynasty? Was she a she-wolf, or a mother cornered by men who broke every promise? Either way, she never ran. Not until there was nowhere left to run. Or Isabella of Castile, who reclaimed her kingdom inch by inch and then funded a voyage that broke the world open. Her faith burned too bright, perhaps, but so did her vision. She wasn't just a consort. She was the throne itself. And then, Christina of Sweden, the queen who stepped down, who said no to marriage, no to heirs, no to the burden of crowns that didn't fit. She didn't abandon power. She redefined it. You wonder what it was like, walking out of that court, uncrowned, unapologetic, free. Let the names slow now. Let them float. You don't need to remember them all. You've already walked beside them. And even if their words fade, their footsteps remain, pressed deep into time's soft soil. What does it mean, truly, to be powerful? Is it the sword? The scroll? The song? Or maybe the refusal to be what was expected, to sit down quietly, to be forgotten? These women did not whisper their names into silence. They etched them in battle cries, in midnight prayers, in letters sent from prison, in treaties signed with steady hands, in lullabies hummed between invasions. Some were loved, some were feared, some were never understood in their own time, but all of them mattered. And tonight, so do you, in the stillness of your room, with the hum of the fan, the weight of the blanket, the soft breath in and out. You are not a queen, but you carry their stories now. You hold them gently behind your eyes, and that is enough. There is nothing more to know. No more names, no more courts, no more fires. Only quiet, only breath, only the hush of history folding itself back into sleep. You did well to come this far. You listened. You walked with them. You stayed. Now let them keep watch. Let Hildegard's music hum softly in your ears. Let Jadwiga's steady voice guard your rest. Let Nzinga's firelight flicker in the corners of your dreams. And let every crown, every scroll, every step of every woman we've met fade softly now into sleep. Sweet dreams.